Hello and welcome to Lord of the Board. My name is Sam Smith, and today we are going to be learning about the Lord of the Hundreds, a faction that is driven by a leader called the Warlord. And this leader, they have a lot of mood swings. They're going to be changing their mood every single turn, and that is actually going to give them some powerful abilities to utilize. One of their main scoring engines is actually oppressing clearings, which means to destroy everything in it and make sure that they are the only player there ruling that clearing. They're going to score on a number of these at the end of each of their turns. Now, one of the things that balancing this faction is kind of tough, because in one instance you want to be spreading out, but you don't want to spread yourself too thin too quickly. And also managing a tableau of these moods, you're going to want to know exactly what moods are best for you and what strategies are going to help you along the way. So I'm about to give you 10 strategy tips to help improve your gameplay as the Lord of the Hundreds. Now, your first goal as Lord of the Hundreds is going to be finding and choosing a starting position on the map where the clearings match the cards in your hand's suit. And the reason for this is so that you can eventually build up those strongholds. You actually need a card in order to build a stronghold, and that card has to match the clearing that you're in. So choosing this starting position is going to be extremely important. And another thing you want to look out is for clearings adjacent to the one that you're going to start at that match your hand as well. And this is important because you want to be spreading on from this position early. In fact, your first goal of the game is to at least secure 3 clearings. That way you can score some oppress points each and every turn. This is kind of your safe base here that's going to be giving you that continual point flow. Now, when thinking about your first mood, this is actually a really important choice because this really shows exactly what kind of warlord you're going to be at the table. I always say to start with Rowdy if you're new to the game. This is because card draw is very, very hard to come by, and Rowdy is the only way in order to get more cards at the end of your turn just from your moods. But I mean, did we expect the Lord of the Hundreds to be popular in card draw? I mean, they are kind of inciting mobs around. I don't think they're very popular with the woodland. And another good opener might be Grandiose, because you can actually swap your command and prowess in their order. This matters because it means that you can actually move out with your warlord, secure an adjacent clearing the first turn of the game, and then you can actually use your command to build a stronghold and an adjacent clearing. This is a good way to kind of jumpstart your engine and start building your empire. And this is especially helpful if the cards in your hand match adjacent clearings to you. Oh, and by the way, something that I personally like to do with the mobs is I like to play some mind games. Sometimes you don't want to be too obvious as to where you're actually inciting those mob tokens. In fact, one of the cool strategies that you can do with the Lord of the Hundreds is to go ahead and incite those mob tokens in a clearing adjacent to the one that you actually want the mob token to be at. Because then next Birdsong, you might get lucky with the dice, and you can go ahead and just spread the mob token to where you actually wanted it for free. For example, you might want to do this adjacent to a ruin, or maybe adjacent to your opponent's enemy buildings. Either way, this is a great way to soft pressure your opponents, spread out a mob token on your next turn, and then move your units into that clearing, and it usually comes as a surprise to your opponents. In general, your prowess items like the root tea, the crossbow, the swords, and the hammer, those are going to be more important to gather than those command items like the bag, boots, or coins. If you think about it, most of the prowess items are going to be giving you 2 actions as opposed to your command's 1 action, because you're going to get a move and a battle for your warlord, which is why these are so important to start collecting. And while we're on the topic of items, sometimes it is actually a good idea to score items, especially when, say, the bag comes up. You might want to go ahead and score that and remove that from the game, because the bag actually gives you one of the best moods. And that's definitely something that you're going to want to think about throughout the game as the Lord of the Hundreds, or what items do I not want in my horde, because they're going to take away really, really powerful moods from me. Now, speaking of the moods and abilities, I like to view these as kind of what gives Lord of the Hundreds players their own sort of flavor. And while all of these have really powerful abilities, some are just more useful at every stage in the game than others. And one of the ways to kind of see this are what abilities are just a very clear benefit as opposed to something that might be a little bit more situational. So when thinking through that lens, we've got Stubborn and Wrathful. These are just really powerful because you get the extra hit, or you get to soak a hit and have kind of an armor. These are really good for that reason. Relentless is also super helpful because you get 2 more actions in your Advance the Warlord step for free. Super powerful and a good way to make some pretty big swings in your game. Rowdy is going to be good when you need those extra cards, which isn't every time, but it is still a very powerful ability. And then we have Grandiose, which once again can usually be helpful, but it's not going to be as helpful as those first 3. And then more getting into like the Lavish, the Jubilant, and the Bitter. These are all very situational abilities. Jubilant can be very powerful, but it can also be very dangerous as spreading out those mob tokens. They can just be attacked by your opponents for points. Sometimes it just doesn't work as well as you would like it to. Now, I'm not saying this to deter you from playing the Lord of the Hundreds, but I will just say, just as a general setup and start the game tip, this faction is going to operate and work better at lower player counts. Now, I will say they're very, very powerful at 2. They are great at 3. They are good at 4, and at 5 they start really getting a bit weaker. And that's totally okay. I think that you should play them at every player count, but just kind of something to look into. Like if you know you're going into a 5-player game, maybe another faction might be better. It's very tough, but I think that people need to play them more at those higher player counts in order to kind of learn how to navigate that. But right now, seeing as their scoring mechanic is literally to have 0 pieces on the map, playing a 5-player game or even a 6-player game with these is going to be really tough to push your way around and clear out enough pieces to really be viable. Because I mean, for the most part, less players equals less pieces, unless you're going up against 2 Vagabonds, which in that case, I would just walk away from that matchup. You can trust me on this one. Now, speaking into a little bit of crafting with the Lord of the Hundreds, one of the things that's really nice for the Warlord to craft is going to be those card drawing capability cards like Swap Meet or Charm Offensive. But also, I think there's a natural alliance between the Foxes and the Warlord, and this relationship makes a lot of sense thematically, seeing as the Foxes are kind of the weapon makers in Root. And by this, I mean that the best items for you to craft as the Warlord are going to be the Fox craftable items, like the crossbow, the swords, as well as the hammer. But we can even move farther than that and look at all of the craftable abilities that are Fox in the Exiles and Partisans deck. You've got False Orders, where if you need to get into a really populated clearing, you can clear them out and battle your way to control and rule that clearing. Or you've also got Informants. This is one of the best cards because you're going to be drawing only 1 card at the end of your turn anyways. Why not make it an ambush? And then we've got the Eerie Emigre, which just gives you more actions, another move, and a battle. It's super powerful. Now, with all of this knowledge in mind, maybe you should start thinking about putting those strongholds in Fox clearings, huh? Now, the scoring curve for the Warlord is kind of an odd one. It's actually a bit slower than what you would expect for such an aggressive faction. You really don't score all that fast, so instead you have to strive for consistency. But with that being said, you have some main scoring goals that you want to keep in mind. If you actually look at a press, 1 through 2, you're going to be scoring 1 point. 3 through 4, you score 2, and then there's 3 and 4 at 5 and 6 clearings respectively. And so when you're looking at what you want to score, like I said at the beginning of the game, getting that first 3 clearings is your first and primary goal because that's going to help you score 2. Don't go all out of your way and bend your back just to get 4. You need to get to 5 next, and that is going to be your next goal. So a way that I try to remind myself of this is that I'm trying to go for 3, 2, then 1. And the reason where I'm getting that number is that you go for 3 clearings, then you go for 5 clearings, then you go for 6 clearings. And as long as you are working towards and reminding yourself of those little mini goals, I think you will be quite a bit better at getting those clearings ruled and oppressed throughout your gameplay. Now, losing the Warlord isn't the end of your game, but I will say it is pretty important to keep them alive. And what I mean by that is that sometimes when the sky is gloom, and when the leaves of the clearings are chipped, burnt, the bark falling all around you, and the Warlord is alone, far away, far, far away from home, sometimes it's better for the Warlord to fall courageously in battle, then to be risen back up and anointed anew back safely at home. Which is just a poetic way to say that sometimes when your Warlord is in a bad position and is not safe at all, letting them die in battle to be anointed back at home is the better plan. But with that in mind, you never really want this to happen. You don't want to have your Warlord die. And so sometimes try to look for opportunities to use those last couple prowess actions in order to get back home to safety instead of overextending yourself. And lastly, speaking of overextending yourself, this is probably one of the biggest problems I see with Lord of the Hundreds players, is overextending yourself too soon. It's definitely a feature of this faction to be able to just surge through the map with all of the actions that you've got, the moves and the battles, but doing it too soon can be pretty detrimental. Especially if you lose your Warlord, because this can really slow down some of that early game momentum that you need to keep consistent. Like I said, consistency is key. Slow and steady really does win the race with this faction. Maintaining those oppressive clearings with those strongholds, recruiting a new warrior every single turn, while your Warlord is slowly kind of pushing the borders of that collection of clearings. And then by that time, it gets to a point where your opponents realize that it's too late. We didn't destroy those strongholds. That Warlord was distracting us the whole time. And now they've amassed an army larger than they've ever seen en route. And then they all lose. Because you won. Everyone, thank you so much for watching up until this point. I really hope that these tips helped you play a better Lord of the Hundreds game. If you're starved for more tips, more strategies, more to think about, definitely check the link in the description down below. It will lead you to the Woodland War Machine podcast, where they released an episode on this very same faction, so definitely check that out. And if you want more Root content in general, just go ahead and check out around here. I've got a lot of videos covering the subject, so subscribe, comment, like down below. That's one way to help YouTube tell other people about the work that I'm doing here, and it's a great way to support the channel. Now grab your torch, grab your pitchforks and your banner, and get out there to rule the woodland. I'll see you next time.